Brilliant. So yeah, I'll probably be touching for the next 25 minutes, mostly on kind of reflecting on 2 years of doing public engagement in a pandemic, and then what this means for the future of our work at the British Science Association, but also more broadly, how you can contribute as public engagement professionals, as aspiring public engagement professionals, as researchers, as all of that as well. So just a quick introduction, as Raghav said, I'm Anna. I manage the programme for the British Science Festival. Sorry, manage the programme for the British Science Festival, and also work on various other projects at the BSA that are very much about audience-led public engagement, but also the role of researchers within that as well, and ultimately bringing both together. I really say that I am a bringer together of people, really, and that's ultimately what public engagement is, and there's so much opportunity there. So I actually did do biology at the University of Leeds for my degree and was a student member of the Royal Society of Biology, so it's a real honour to be invited in another capacity now, so I want to just thank the RSB for that. So a bit about the British Science Association. We are a national charity based in London, but we have employees across the UK. I'm not based in London anymore, so it's quite exciting. We recently released a new 10-year strategy, which I will talk a bit more about, which will give you a bit of context to our work and the work that I do as well. So, you know, why do we exist? What is the point in us? Yeah. So our new vision is a future where science is more relevant, representative, and connected to society. Science is often seen as the domain of professionals and experts, or a subject to be studied at school. Science is also not representative of wider society, and because of this, science isn't relatable or accessible for lots of people. We're a charity who is really working to change this, and we're working to create a world where science and society are more cohesive and connected, one where more members of the public feel empowered to engage with science, and science has a greater ability to understand and engage with the public. So it's very much about a two-way thing. To achieve this, we want to transform the diversity and inclusivity of science to reach audiences underrepresented in science, and increase the number of people who are actively engaged and involved in science. And ultimately, by unlocking the potential of a more diverse group of people, we increase our ability to tackle some of the world's biggest challenges and shape our future for the better. So I'll touch a bit on our 10-year strategy. We have 3 key objectives that we're working towards. And so number 1 is we want to see more people, especially those from currently underrepresented groups, feel that science is more relevant to their lives. And to achieve this, we're providing engagement activities that effectively reach engaged, underserved audiences with science, enrich young people's experiences of science in a way that encourages more of them to see science as relevant, partner with communities to enable them to conduct, influence, or apply science and research to their work. Our second objective is we will develop programs to facilitate more people, especially those from currently underrepresented groups, to play a bigger role, have a more powerful voice, and build stronger relationships in and with the science sector. So to do this, we're amplifying the missing voices in science, to champion those whose voices are often overlooked, set up a participatory structures to facilitate dialogue, foster mutual understanding and transfer power between communities of underrepresented audiences and science and research professionals. And we'll also enable collaboration and dialogue to improve the way science is applied and used among business, policy, and third sectors. Then our third objective is that we will build our capacity and that of the science and research engagement sector to understand and address structural inequalities in science engagement, advocate for the adoption of a more participatory and transformative form of science engagement, as well as improve the diversity and inclusivity at the BSA and throughout the sector. And we've been on a big journey on this over the last 3 years and are continuing on that too. So, you know, not too many things to try and achieve in the next 10 years. So we're doing a number of things now. So we've got education programs and schemes, including our CREST Award, which you may have heard of. We do a number of activities to convene and influence leaders, like the BSA Summit, which is a thought leadership event, which brings together leaders in business and researchers and all of that. Also hold cross-sector conversations. We are leading on EDI change. As I said, we've been on a huge journey with this, kindly supported by Welcome for the last 3 years. We also do science engagement activities, which is where my role falls into mostly, as well as community engagement, which I'll touch upon a bit in the next few slides. So you can find out more about, our vision and mission and like what we're doing at our website, and I'll share all of these kind of key links in the chat afterwards, so you don't have to write that down, because I realise it's not that helpful on the slide. So in terms of what is coming up, it'll be mostly a whistle-stop tour through all of this, but I'll try and kind of share as much detail as possible. So I'll delve a bit more into, what I mean by audience first public engagement and what that is at the BSA and how my work transcends that. I'll be talking about the public engagement work we did in the pandemic and continue to do, evaluation, learnings. We love talking about that. And then reflections in 2020 and 2021, and then looking towards the future and how that's going to impact our work going forward. And then a few kind of opportunities for you if I've got time to touch on that later on as well. So audience first public engagement at the BSA. So as I think I mentioned, I oversee the content development for the British Science Festival. So this means working really closely with researchers, doing a lot of audience research and community partnerships. So the British Science Festival travels to a different place in the United Kingdom each year, and it connects people with scientists, engineers, technologists and social sciences. Each year the festival brings over 120 events to an adult audience, and our programme has lots of different types of events, from talks to workshop, museum takeovers, parties, etc. and stuff you wouldn't necessarily see at a science festival, like life drawing in this picture. Content is very much tailored to people's general interests or experiences and topical societal issues, and that drives all of the content for our festival. This can include sensitive topics such as male suicide or fertility, which draw on people's lived experience, and more light-hearted content, such as psychology behind body image or the role of fear in horror films, so everything in between, really. Through this, we really aim to expand the perception of what science is and can be, and we continually try to push the boundaries of our audiences and welcome new types of events that attract those who would not typically go to a science festival. So I will also do a shameless plug. Next year, the festival is taking place in Leicester from the 13th to 17th September. We've got loads of opportunities to get involved, and I will again share the link with you after this. So the other bit, kind of major project that I work on is the Making Connections grant scheme. So to understand more about this, I need to take a step back and tell you about the UK Science Festivals Network. So it's a network of over 50 science festivals across the UK, which the BSA coordinates, and it exists to convene science festivals and advocate for the work that they do. And as part of this, since 2017, UK RISE, or UK Research and Innovation, have funded us to deliver a grant scheme called Making Connections for network members to bring unengaged audiences from low socioeconomic backgrounds specifically and researchers together. And fundamental to this scheme is the involvement of researchers and community groups who work with their target audience to develop projects together supported by the Science Festival. And over the last 5 years, the programme has developed into a really valued scheme, do say so myself, which brings groups together who would not traditionally come into contact. And for researchers, community partners and science festivals involved, the experience has often been challenging, as you can imagine, but immensely rewarding and impactful. And this programme has produced some really insightful learnings, particularly over the last year during the pandemic, which I will delve into a bit more shortly. So again, just to give you a bit more context about our engagement work and what drives it. So understanding our audiences, so who isn't engaged in science, is fundamental to our engagement approach. And since 2015, we've been developing and testing a really simple segmentation model that we use as a framework to understand our adult audiences. And it also helps us refer to groups of people based on the extent to which they see science as part of their culture and identity. The 4 groups are professionals, so people who work or study or produce scientific knowledge, so probably everyone in this conference. The second group is engaged, so people who are enthusiastic about science but don't work in it. 51% are inactive, so it's most of the population interested in science but make no particular efforts to engage. And then 25% are not interested. They do not see science as for them. They do not see science as relevant to their lives. So this drives a lot of our programming and thinking around who our activities are targeted at. So this is the slide with the least words, but the most of me speaking, so do bear with me. This is a timeline of our public engagement and what I was really working on during the pandemic. At the beginning of the pandemic, it was really difficult. Yeah, I don't need to say any more on that, I don't think. Personally, we had a reduced team capacity due to furlough, which I'm sure many of you were all experiencing as well. And we had to rethink our approaches to public engagement. As kind of Toby mentioned, many people were shifting their programs to online, but we also didn't really feel as though it was right for us, given our resources. We needed to really take a step back and think, how can we contribute to our audiences during this time? The festival that we were organising for 2020 was postponed for the first time since World War II or something. The festival has been going for a very, very long time. And we began to navigate what our use as a public engagement team could be in this really unknown and kind of scary landscape. So with a reduced team, we decided our best use would be to focus our resources on networks and communities we already had and how we could best support them during this time in 2020. So these included our UK Science Festivals Network and our Community Engagement Network, and also our work with a group of young people who we had been collaborating with to develop content for the 2020 festival, which had now been postponed. So here's like a really, really quick timeline. I will try and be quick. So in spring 2020, in March, the Department for Culture, Media and Sport released an inquiry into how the cultural sector had been impacted by COVID-19. And we saw this as a really important opportunity for us to convene the UK Science Festival Network to really get their understanding of how the pandemic was affecting them. And we submitted a kind of long report to the inquiry as evidence, which was really helpful for us to get a snapshot of the sector. As I said, despite the festival's postponement in 2020, I was also really keen to support the young people we'd been working with to develop content for the festival. And this actually resulted in a really, this project has a close place in my heart because it was a really great opportunity to bring a social media and boredom research together that we'd also been working for the festival separately with these young people to really understand, what boredom is and what boredom means and how we can creatively respond to that as well, especially because everyone was in lockdown and bored. So it was a really nice and relevant way to tap into people's experiences and what they were going through. And the young people actually produced a really brilliant zine in collaboration with the researcher around their experiences of the pandemic so far through the lens of boredom. And then in autumn winter, we did a community innovation grants for our community engagement network. So just for a bit of background, the community engagement network is a network of over 400 grassroots community organisation and groups who work with audiences underrepresented in science. And these include those from minority ethnic backgrounds, those with disabilities, those from low socioeconomic backgrounds, and those disadvantaged in terms of education. And for the last 6 years, we've really been building our approach to grassroots community engagement. And at the heart of it is getting out of the way. And I cannot stress that enough, especially with underrepresented audiences and those who might not be those who might identify as not interested, and supporting these grassroots groups to engage with science on their terms. If I could bold that, I would, coming out of my mouth. So as part of our COVID-19 community innovation grants, we repurposed funding from British Science Week that we'd normally have to address the immediate needs that communities may be facing in terms of delivering activities for their audiences. And we really wanted to showcase and demonstrate how community groups were innovating and share these learnings. And we posted loads of blogs on this, which I will also share a link to because they're really insightful and again, so a really good snapshot of not only the experiences of these community organisations and what the issues that audiences were facing, but also how they were kind of trying to overcome that through the lens of science engagement and using, science activities to do that on their terms, which is great. And then the Making Connections grant scheme. So as I said, it's been running for the last 5 years. In March 2020, when it first became apparent that COVID-19 was going to profoundly affect our work and social lives, we were in the throes of launching this grant scheme for the 4th year running. We largely went ahead with the programme as we had done in previous years, bearing in mind we really didn't know what was going to happen. But included in the guidelines the need for contingency plans should in-person events and activities be unable to go ahead. I'm laughing because honestly it is quite funny when you look back at it, because everyone was hopeful that by autumn, like we were having conversations that autumn 2020 or at least early 2021 things would be returned to quote unquote normal. At this time, it was becoming clear that community organisations, as I was talking about, particularly those on the front line serving audiences who are most at need, were being hugely stretched and needed support, not additional pressure and stretching of resources from, you know, random people trying to engage them with their research. And a core part of this scheme really is for festivals to work alongside community groups to develop projects that are relevant and responsive. So naturally, we were thinking, could festivals use this funding to give support in some way during this increasingly turbulent time? Previous interviews with community partners that have taken part in this project before suggested so, even if it was just providing activities for their audiences or some welcome distraction. I'll explore this area a bit more later. And then the final thing that we did in 2020 right through to 2021 was resume running and planning for an in-person festival, which again I laugh because, you know, what a thing to decide to do, but we did it. And I could really do a whole presentation on running an in-person festival during a pandemic, but regardless, we did pull it off. With over 120 in-person events in Chelmsford during the 7th to 11th of September. And I have to give a shout out to Raghav, who was also involved in helping us run some activities there, so thank you. We wanted to fundamentally centre local people's experiences of the last year, and various projects and content did focus on this. And we got lots of great feedback from researchers as well who were involved, saying it was their first time doing in-person engagement since the pandemic started and how valued the opportunity was. We're still really processing that it happened, to be honest, but I think people really needed something to look forward to, and I see the festival as an opportunity for people to come together more than anything, and it was great to be able to do that after the year that we'd had. So ultimately, all of this really demonstrates, I think, how science engagement can be used as a great means for us to meet the needs of people, from solving problems in their local community to providing opportunities to socialise, come together and just have fun. And this ethos is really fundamental to my approach to project development and engagement, but also I think broadly to the BSA's approach to programme development, and will continue to be in the next 10 years with our strategy, especially if we're to achieve our vision. So I'll touch really briefly on evaluating programmes because I am aware I'm running out of time. So these are just some of the things that we use to evaluate programmes, but I think a really good example of an evaluation journey that I've been on is the Making Connections grant scheme. So the programme is ambitious and it seeks to impact not only our audiences, underrepresented audiences, but festival organisers, researchers and community organisations involved. And as such, evaluation has played a big part. And I've learned a lot kind of having to figure this out over the last 5 years. Since its conception and as the programme has evolved, the focus has shifted from quantity to quality. And with it, audience sizes naturally decreased. In turn, ways of collecting feedback from programme participants needed to change, and we wanted to really understand more about the people getting involved and their experiences as well as motivations. And you can't really get this from a standard tick box evaluation form, while they do really have their place for certain events. So at the beginning of 2020, when we were running it during the pandemic, we had high hopes of visiting projects and speaking with participants in a way that didn't hinder their project participation or enjoyment, or felt like they were being watched or observed. However, with stay-at-home rules in place for much of the year, we weren't able to do this, unfortunately. And in lieu, we did put together an online feedback form in the hope that some people would complete it. But as you can imagine, We got nowhere near the kind of information that we'd hope for a variety of reasons, probably internet fatigue really being key there as well. Despite this, as in previous years, we were able to at least conduct in-depth interviews with researchers and community partners involved. And these continue to prove most insightful about the impact of the project overall. And we've been able to develop this project further with audiences in 2021. And thankfully, we have been able to visit projects again, which is great, and why I love the job. I also actually invited Failspace Project to support festival organisers to also critically reflect on their project through the lens of failure, highlighting that it's not a negative but vital aspect of projects. And I really urge you to check out the Failspace Project as well. Watch this space. Then in terms of how the reflections from the last year and what this means for our future work. So, coming back to the BSA's 10-year strategy and how lessons from the pandemic will impact our engagement work in the coming years, I've really taken away 4 key things. Again, a lot of this actually does touch on what Toby was saying, but it just goes to show, how great it is to be sharing the stage with him. So we knew there were deep divides in society pre-pandemic, but it really did shine a spotlight and made them impossible to ignore. So how can we really use our power within public engagement to challenge the status quo and create a more equitable and inclusive sector, if not society, because these divides aren't going away anytime soon. So we really need to be actively participating in figuring out what we can do to do that. And it does feel like a big task, and it is, but even small incremental acts can add up to bigger change. And this has been and will continue to be a focus of our work at the BSA. The other thing is, what are we actually doing to help? How can we best use our resources to truly contribute, support people and address these divides? While we ask ourselves these questions often, the pandemic really brought this into sharp focus again. We had an opportunity to pause, albeit in a kind of chaotic environment of the pandemic, and figure out what our next steps could be, which resulted in the COVID-19 Community Innovation Grants and an honest look at the Making Connections grant scheme. Letting go of egos and asking ourselves these questions will be fundamental to our work in the next 10 years. Then third is the value of community. Coming together, sharing stories, supporting one another was absolutely vital in the era of social distancing and lockdowns, and it is important in engagement, always. The power of strong networks cannot be overstated, and they support you and help you to get things done and really make change happen. And we'll continue to grow our networks and work to strengthen our bonds with new and existing groups. And then finally, I think this is one that I feel, so strongly about, approaching science engagement through a lens of empathy and humanity. Science engagement does not exist in a vacuum. It is about human relationships and meeting people where they're at, metaphorically and literally. You can't force people to engage with you, and it's okay if they're not quite ready yet, and maybe they never will be, and maybe you never will be. But as I said earlier, you have to let go of your ego and leave that at the door. That is fundamental. Once you truly take the time to meet, listen, and get to know people, and then you're on the path to true and meaningful engagement. So I want to kind of highlight that engagement does come in many forms. So, there's one-off events that you can do, which are really great for knowledge exchange and getting quick input from audiences. And there's also longer-term projects, which can be time-consuming, but very often rewarding and impactful, like the Making Connections projects, where you partner with a community group and really get to know them and figure out how to share your research with them. But remember, engagement doesn't have to be one-way knowledge exchange, and it is so much more than that. So there's loads of other ways you can contribute as well and kind of develop your skills in engagement. So contributing your skills, your value is greater than just your research output and knowledge. You've got loads of transferable skills that you can use as a volunteer to a local community organisation, as a trustee, or even giving out food at a food bank or something like that. There's also projects like Access Lab, which I will again put links to, which brings together people who have scientific questions with scientific researchers to investigate a topic that is of interest to the person or community. fundamentally, the researcher is not an expert on the topic that the person wants to explore. So working in pairs on one-to-one, it's an opportunity for participants to learn how to find sources of scientific information, and for scientists to begin to understand some of the barriers people have to accessing their work as you contribute your skills in research as opposed to just your knowledge. And then there's also the importance of building relationships, trust, and turning up, which comes back to the literal turning up and meeting people where they're at in my previous slide. So there's community buddies and relational meetings, which we've run as part of the BSA Community Leaders Network, where we bring researchers and community leaders who live in a shared area together to develop relationships together, and it fundamentally starts at that relationship as opposed to any agenda or research or anything like that. And then community listening. In 2020, the Science Festivals Alliance in the US worked with Daniel Aguirre, a community organizer, to hold several online listening sessions that amplified community voices. And this served to remind professionals that community engagement starts at setting aside agendas in order to listen. And listening is engagement and can be engagement and should be where you start. So I really implore you to watch and reflect on that, because some of those conversations were absolutely so powerful, and I just think will really help give you context around, you know, listening as engagement as well. So that's me. Feel free to get in touch if you'd like to discuss anything further. My email address is there. Thank you so much for listening.